I never meant to look through her phone. We were sitting on the couch, her legs stretched across my lap like any other night, her phone buzzing away on the cushion next to her. I was flipping through the channels, trying to find something to watch, when she got up to grab a snack from the kitchen. She didn't take her phone with her. That's when I noticed something weird. It was the way her notifications were coming in. Rapid fire, one after the other. I wasn't trying to be nosy, but it was impossible not to see it. Her lock screen lit up with messages from a name I didn't recognize, Andrew. I squinted at the screen as it buzzed again, and I caught a glimpse of something that made my stomach drop, a preview of a photo. But it wasn't just any photo. It was her. I felt my pulse quicken. The image was too small to make out the details, but I knew my wife. The curve of her hip, the edge of her red hair in the corner of the frame, it was unmistakable. A part of me wanted to put the phone down and pretend I hadn't seen anything, but something made me hesitate. I glanced towards the kitchen. She was still rummaging around in the fridge, humming to herself, completely unaware that I was staring at her phone like it was a ticking bomb. Without thinking, I picked it up. The messages were open, waiting for me. My thumb hovered over the thread for a second, and then I tapped it, feeling a guilty knot form in my gut. I don't know what I was expecting, maybe an explanation, maybe some innocent conversation that would put my mind at ease. But when I scrolled up, my breath caught in my throat. There were more pictures. A lot more. And they weren't just of her in some casual, playful poses. These were intimate. Explicit. The kind of photos a wife should never be sending to anyone but her husband. My stomach turned as I realized who Andrew was, a complete stranger she had been sending these to. The messages that came with the photos were even worse. Flirty, suggestive, full of private jokes and winks, like they'd been building up to something for a while. I dropped the phone back onto the couch just as she walked in with a bowl of popcorn, flashing me her usual easy smile. But everything felt different now. Like the ground had shifted beneath me, and I was hanging on by a thread. She sat down next to me, completely unaware that I had just seen everything. I glanced at her, heart pounding in my chest, but I didn't say a word. Not yet. Instead, I forced a smile and pretended nothing was wrong. But something was very, very wrong. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept turning it over in my mind, those pictures, those messages. I felt like a fool lying next to her, listening to her soft breathing, while my mind raced. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of her, posing, smiling, teasing someone who wasn't me. By morning, I had made up my mind. I needed to know more. A few photos and messages couldn't be the whole story. It had to go deeper. So, while she was in the shower, I made my move. Her phone was still charging on her nightstand, right where she'd left it. My heart was pounding as I unlocked it, knowing full well that what I was doing crossed a line. But she had already crossed it first, hadn't she? The messages from Andrew were there, just like before. But this time, I didn't stop scrolling. I went back, weeks, maybe months, digging through their conversations. And the further back I went, the worse it got. They'd been talking for a while. At first, it was just harmless flirting, or at least that's how it seemed. Jokes about work, the weather, nothing serious. But then it shifted. It was like I could see the exact moment when they both stopped pretending it was just fun. The compliments became bolder, the photos more revealing, and before long, they were talking about meeting up. It wasn't just talk either, there were plans. They'd tried to meet twice already. Something had come up both times, but that didn't stop them from planning a third. And this time, they were determined to make it happen. I could feel the blood boiling in my veins. She was standing just feet away, behind the bathroom door, while I was uncovering this hidden side of her life. This betrayal. It wasn't just the fact that she was sending photos to some random guy. It was how easy it seemed for her, how comfortable. Like this wasn't new for her. She'd even made excuses for why she couldn't see him before, citing work, or me, or her family obligations. But the excuses felt thin. This wasn't a mistake. This was planned. Deliberate. I was about to lock the phone again when something caught my eye, a hidden folder buried deep in her gallery, separate from the rest of her photos. It was password protected, but I knew my wife well enough to guess what it might be. My hands shook as I typed in her birthday. It unlocked. And there they were, dozens of photos, far more graphic than anything I had seen in her messages. Photos that left no doubt in my mind about what she had been doing. These weren't just teasing shots. They were full-on explicit pictures that showed me a side of her she had never shown me in all our years together. I snapped the phone shut just as I heard the water stop in the bathroom. She'd be out any minute. My heart was racing, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had the evidence now. All of it. But what was I going to do with it? I had no idea yet. All I knew was that I couldn't confront her. Not yet. She had no clue I knew, and that gave me an advantage. She trusted me to stay in the dark, to be the unsuspecting, clueless husband. But I wasn't going to stay in the dark any longer. The next few days were unbearable. Every moment I spent with her felt like a lie. She was so normal. She made breakfast, talked about her day, laughed at the same shows we always watched. But every time I looked at her, all I could see were those photos. Those texts. The way she'd flirted with that guy like it was second nature. I tried to act normal too. I told myself I'd confront her when the time was right, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized how useless that would be. What was I going to say? I found your photos. I know you're cheating. She'd probably cry, apologize, say it didn't mean anything. But that wouldn't change what she did. That wouldn't erase what I'd seen. It would just be words. I needed something more. Something that would make her feel the weight of what she'd done. And that's when the idea came to me. It was almost too simple. I could feel my pulse quicken as the plan formed in my mind, like pieces of a puzzle clicking together. If she wanted to send private photos to strangers, then maybe those photos shouldn't be so private anymore. Maybe her family, the people she cared about most, should see what she's really been up to. I didn't decide right away. For a while, I just watched. I paid more attention to her phone, waited for more messages from Andrew. I kept telling myself I needed more proof, more ammunition, but really, I was just waiting. Watching her flirt, sending him new photos while sitting right next to me, like it was nothing. The nerve of it made me sick. The last straw came one night when we were in bed. She thought I was asleep, but I wasn't. I could feel her shifting next to me, checking her phone under the covers. The faint glow lit up her face just enough for me to see her smirking as she typed something. Then she slipped her phone back onto the nightstand, rolled over, and closed her eyes like nothing had happened. I knew right then that she wasn't going to stop. Not unless I made her. So the next morning, when she left for work, I decided it was time. Her family had a group chat, her parents, her two sisters, and her brother. I wasn't a part of it, but I knew she used it all the time. It was where they shared everything. Birthdays, holidays, random photos of their day. They were close, which made this even more perfect. I waited until I was alone in the house before grabbing her phone again. It took me just a minute to find the folder with all her explicit photos. I selected the worst ones, the ones I knew would hurt the most, and saved them to my phone. My hands were shaking as I did it, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. Then I opened her family group chat. I hesitated for a second. My thumb hovered over the photos, ready to attach them. I felt the weight of what I was about to do, the point of no return. There was no undoing this. No apology that would fix it. But the anger, the betrayal. It was too much. She thought she could get away with this. That no one would know. She was wrong. I attached the photos, one by one, making sure they were clear. Her family deserved to know the truth about who she really was. They needed to see it with their own eyes. And then, with one final deep breath, I hit send. For a moment after I hit send, everything went still. I just stared at the screen, watching the message load, then disappear into the chat. The photos were gone, sent, out there. It was done. There was no taking it back now. My hands were clammy as I set the phone down on the table. A strange calm settled over me, like the eye of a storm. It was quiet, too quiet. The house felt suffocating all of a sudden, and I realized I hadn't thought this part through. I didn't know what was going to happen next. I just knew it was going to be bad. I stood up, pacing back and forth, running my hands through my hair as I glanced at the phone again. No response yet. I could imagine them, though, her parents, her siblings, getting the notification, opening it up to find that. The shock, the disgust, the confusion. I wasn't sure how long it would take. Minutes? Hours? But I knew one thing for sure, she was about to be exposed in the worst possible way. And then, the phone buzzed. I stopped cold, staring at it like it was a snake ready to strike. My heart was pounding again, harder now. I picked it up and unlocked the screen, opening the group chat to see what I had unleashed. The first message was from her sister. What the hell is this? I could picture her face, the shock, the anger behind that simple question. It wasn't just curiosity, it was accusation. Then, another message popped up from her brother. Is this a joke? I couldn't help but smirk. No, it wasn't a joke. This was her real life. The real her. I imagined them all sitting there, their phones lighting up one by one as they stared in disbelief at what they were seeing. Then came the message I had been waiting for. Her mother. Oh my God. Rachel, explain this right now. I could practically hear her voice, sharp, disbelieving, the kind of voice that only comes out when someone's world has just been shattered. Her mother had always been the strict one, the moral compass of the family. This would crush her. The phone started buzzing nonstop after that. More messages, questions, a few horrified emojis, people typing furiously but not knowing what to say. It was chaos, and Rachel had no idea it was happening. She was probably sitting at her desk at work, completely unaware that her phone was about to explode. I couldn't help but feel a sick sense of satisfaction. It was wrong, I knew that. But watching the fallout unfold was intoxicating. It was like I was finally getting my revenge for all those nights she'd been lying to me, for every picture she'd sent to that stranger, for every secret she thought she could keep. Then, it happened. Her phone, sitting next to mine, started buzzing. It lit up with a dozen notifications, calls, texts, all coming in at once. I stared at it as it shook on the table, the screen lighting up with her family's names. Her sister. Her mother. Her father. They were all calling her, desperate for answers, for an explanation. I almost wished I could see her face when she picked up that first call, when she realized what I had done. When she understood that her entire family had just seen her private shame. I stood there, listening to her phone vibrate against the wood, feeling the weight of what I'd done settle into my chest. The thrill of revenge was starting to wear off, replaced by something heavier. Her phone kept buzzing, louder now, like it wouldn't stop until everything came crashing down. The buzzing didn't stop. I stood there, frozen, watching her phone light up again and again. Every call, every text, it was like a countdown. Any second now, she'd see them. The photos. The messages. Her family's shocked, horrified reactions. And then, she'd know. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe a confrontation. Maybe tears, screaming, anger. But there was no going back now. The line had been crossed, and we both knew it. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but it wasn't guilt. It was something else, something darker. Then, it happened. I heard her car pull up in the driveway. I hadn't even realized how late it had gotten. My pulse quickened as I heard her keys jingle at the door, the sound of her heels clicking against the floor as she walked in, completely unaware of the storm waiting for her. "Hey!" she called out, her voice casual, almost cheerful. I could hear the rustling of her coat, her purse hitting the counter. "What do you want for dinner?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I just stood there, watching her phone light up with yet another call. Her mother this time. Again. The screen showed the familiar family group chat, unread messages piled up, like a dam waiting to break. Then she saw it. I could tell the moment she noticed. Her steps slowed, and I heard the sound of her phone being picked up. A pause. Then her footsteps stopped altogether. Silence. She was reading the messages. Seeing the calls. I imagined her face, eyes wide, skin turning pale as it all sank in. She knew something was wrong. And then, finally, the photos. Her breath caught audibly, a sharp intake of air that sounded almost like she'd been punched. For a second, she didn't move. Didn't speak. I could feel the weight of it, her shock, her panic, hanging thick in the air between us. It was almost tangible. She called my name, her voice small, shaky. "Tom?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stood there, waiting for the explosion. I heard her footsteps again, faster this time, as she walked toward the living room. She turned the corner, her face pale as death, holding her phone in her hand like it was something toxic, something that had burned her. Her eyes were wide, frantic, and she locked onto me like she knew I had the answers. "Tom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What the hell is this?" I stared at her, my expression blank, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. She knew exactly what it was. Her phone started buzzing again. A text this time. She glanced down at it, and her face crumpled. It was her mother again, probably demanding to know why her daughter had sent such explicit photos to the family group chat. Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a split second, I felt something, guilt, maybe. But it was fleeting, like a shadow passing through. Because deep down, I knew I wasn't the villain here. Not really. She was. She stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "Tom, I can explain. Don't, I said, cutting her off. My voice was steady, but my hands were clenched into fists. Just don't. The silence between us felt heavy, oppressive, as her phone buzzed again, filling the room with its incessant noise. She looked down at it, then back at me, her face a mixture of horror, disbelief, and panic. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She sank down onto the couch, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline, but it wouldn't save her now. Nothing would. Her family would never look at her the same way. They'd never forget what they'd seen. And neither would I. Her phone buzzed one last time, but she didn't pick it up. Instead, she just sat there, staring at the floor, tears streaming down her face, completely shattered. And me? I stood there, feeling nothing. No satisfaction. No triumph. Just emptiness. I had gotten my revenge, but now, staring at her like this, it felt hollow. Pointless. I didn't know what was going to happen next. Whether she'd leave, or whether I'd want her to. Whether her family would ever forgive her, or if they'd even look at her again after this. But whatever happened, there was no going back. Not for either of us. The damage was done. And her phone kept buzzing. How would you handle finding out your partner was involved in an online affair? Would you confront them or take revenge?